For our final project in this class on examining an agri-food supply chain, our group chose to look into the supply chain of a pork chop. The first step along the supply chain of a pork chop is the raising of the hogs. On average, it takes 25 to 28 weeks to finish out a hog. When producing a pig to finish, there are 3 stages to this. There is the farrow to wean, the weaner barns, and then the grow to finish barns. At each one of these stages in the process of finishing out a pig, there is value added. When the piglet leaves the farrow to wean barn, they are worth around $50 each. After that, the pig then enters the weaner barn, where at the end the pig is worth around $70, meaning that at the weaner barn a total of around $20 was added in value to the price of the pig. Finally, the pig enters the grow to finish barn, where at the end, when the pig goes to market, it is worth around $266, meaning that there was a total value added at the finishing barn of $196 to the pig. However, when we look at finishing a pig, we also have to look at the potential input costs in producing a pig. There are many variables at play when we look at producing a pig. The total input cost of feed is around $110 total throughout the whole finishing process of the pig from birth to finish. This is based on a diet where the pig will consume 9 bushels of corn and 2 bushels of minerals and soybean meal, where the price per bushel of corn is $6 and the price per bushel of soybean is $14, meaning that there would be around $28 in mineral costs. Another input cost that we have to consider when looking at producing pork is the input cost of utilities. The input cost of utilities to consider is the cost of medication for the pig as well as the hydro and barn costs. On average, the cost for medication is $3 and the cost of hydro and barn is $28 per pig, meaning that the total cost of inputs from birth to finish is $141.
The next step in the supply chain is pork processing and packaging. This is where the hogs in the supply chain are slaughtered, broken down into cuts, and packaged once they leave the farm where they are grown. Packing plants in Ontario include Conestoga Meat Packers, Maple Leaf Foods Incorporated, Canada First Brands / Willard Meats International Limited, and Sofina Foods. All of these processing plants receive, butcher, and process pigs. Most of them rely on contracts with the farmers that allow the farmer to supply them with their hogs. The value added during the processing and packing process includes all of the resources used from shipping it to the processing plant, the hogs being butchered, and the meat being packaged. One of the main ways that value is added into each cut of pork is through labor, where each employee performs a task to help operate the plant so that the hogs can reach the final product, therefore adding value to the pork. Quality assurances from the packing plants also allow for an added value because consumers are willing to pay more for a known reputable brand. Although the overall value added and final price of cuts will vary between processors and the size of the plant, this is how a small pork processor might price their meat. First, the amount that the hog was purchased for in dollars per pound is taken and divided by 58% to get the carcass weight after the pig is slaughtered. The price for trucking and hanging the carcass can then be added, followed by dividing the number by 65% for labor and separating the carcass into cuts. Since this is meant for a smaller processor, it does not factor in the packaging, which also adds value.
The next step in the supply chain is the distributors. After the pork is processed by packers and processors, distributors handle logistics to transport the packaged meat to both domestic and international markets. The supply chain also includes meat byproducts, which are delivered from the farm through meat processors or wholesale markets to wholesalers, and eventually to retailers, butcher shops, and restaurants. The supply chain from farm to wholesaler follows 2 primary channels. 65.8% of the supply goes through meat processors, while 34.2% flows through the wholesale market. Retailers receive pork from wholesalers and supply it to the consumers through chain stores, butcher shops, and restaurants. Most meat byproducts are distributed in bulk packaging by wholesalers and are later repackaged in retail packaging, such as wraps and polystyrene boxes for sale to consumers. The exterior qualities of the meat, such as the color and freshness, play an important role in its appeal at retail locations. Wholesalers add value by purchasing in bulk, packaging the meat for ease of resale, and ensuring it reaches retailers and restaurants. Retailers further increase value by repackaging the pork into smaller, consumer-friendly portions, often with attractive packaging that ensures freshness and convenience. The next step in the supply chain is the markets. After the distributors have moved the pork to various market outlets, such as supermarkets, farmers markets, and butcher shops, the goods are placed on store shelves or directly sold at farmers markets. At the supermarkets, products are typically displayed for purchases by consumers. At butcher shops and farmers markets, consumers may purchase products directly with more personalized approaches. The market adds value by making the pork products accessible to consumers through both physical and online stores. In supermarkets, butcher shops, and farmers markets, value is added through convenience, personalized service, and availability of fresh, locally sourced products. Additionally, there is often packaging or branding that can affect the perceived value of the product. Retail pricing is also a key value-adding step that brings the product to its final retail price of $4 to $5 per pound for pork chop. Canada's pork is not only sold in the local domestic markets, but also served in the foreign markets as well. 57% of Ontario's pork exports to the United States, followed by exports to Mexico of 14%, Japan of 9%, and the rest of the world is approximately 20%. Based off the pork exports, Ontario exports pork to a total of 41 countries, while Canada exports to a total of 78 countries. This shows the international integration of the Canadian pork industry, expanding the market beyond the local industry and national consumer.
Once the good has moved through all the stages within the supply chain, it can finally make its way to the hands of the consumer. The consumer can come in many variations depending on environment, culture, and demographic. Within Canada, pork typically appeals to the middle-class population and specifically families. Pork is a relatively affordable option compared to other sources of proteins and vitamins. Pork is easily accessible and comes in many forms within the retail market. We have seen that the consumption levels in Canada have experienced a general decline since 1980. In 2024, the average Canadian consumed 24 kilograms of pork. This is a vast difference to the typical Chinese consumer who eats an average of 52 kilograms of pork a year. This makes the exporting of pork an appealing choice for Canadian farmers.
The graph titled Output of Hogs represents the number of hogs produced in Ontario. The graph shows a steady increase in the number of hogs produced between the years 2010 to 2022, indicating a small spike in the supply in 2020 and then a small dip in supply in 2021. The fluctuation in production after 2019 could have been due to COVID when production was irregular. The steady increase in production of hogs corresponds with the steady growth of the population from 7.02 billion people in 2010 to 8.02 billion people in 2022. Therefore, the supply was steadily increased with demand. The second graph is titled The Average Price Received by Ontario Farmers in dollars per 100 kilograms. The price that farmers received is many times based on the open market or the processing plant that they bring their market hogs to. There was a decline in price from 1998 to 2000, which was possibly due to a low price of hogs in the open market or processors taking margins from the farmers due to a lack of established processing plants. It can be seen that there was also a dip in price in 2009, although it was brief and rises to a peak in 2014. The prices of pork in 2022 and 2023 seem to be at their height, possibly due to an increase in demand or increase in population. Overall, the average price received by farmers in Ontario has risen slightly but continues to fluctuate.
When we look at the price of consumption of pork chops over the years, we can see that in general, the price of pork chops has steadily increased with the rate of inflation over the years, with spikes in 2015 of $12.93 per kilogram of pork chop. A dip can be seen in 2020, which is in part due to COVID and the shutting down of packing plants, which led to a surplus in the demand in 2021. When we look at the consumption of pork per capita in Canada graph, we can see that over time it shows a slight decline in the consumption per capita of pork chops. This indicates that the Canadian population has had a decrease in preferences for purchasing and consuming pork. Although the population in Canada may be increasing, it consists of many demographics, some of which do not eat pork as part of their religion, which may contribute to the decrease in consumption of pork per capita. The larger decline after the spike in 2023 could be corresponding to the levels of immigration coming into Canada who do not eat pork. This would lower the amount of pork consumed per capita as the percentage of the population who do not eat pork is increasing.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to our presentation on the supply chain of pork. We hope you learned something new, and if you want to know more, please view our written report that is referenced at the end. Thank you.